All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Good morning, folks. I'm Ben Solomon. I'm the Assistant Chief and Land Acquisition Manager for the Land and Water Access Division. If I haven't met you, nice to meet you virtually today. Today, we have our July edition of our Science and Communication webinar. As usual, we're going to ask that you keep your cameras off and your mics muted. And if you have any questions, please drop those in the chat, and we will have an opportunity at the end of the presentation to go through those questions. Today we have our Land and Water Access Central Coast Forest Manager, Travis Cornigi, will be presenting on restoration ecology and practice on our NCWRC coastal game lands. Travis has been with the agency for about 10 years now, and I think, Travis, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the majority of your 10-year stint has been at the coast. And Travis, I'll hand this over to you. Thank you for presenting for us today.
Thank you, Ben. So, if everybody's ready, we'll get right into it. And yes, most of my time has been on the coast. I did start at Butner for about a year, so I was able to get some experience in the Piedmont. But today we're going to be talking about the restoration of our game lands. And a lot of times we get game lands and they are in less than ideal states. So as public trust doctrine says, we have to do our best to manage these to our best ability. So a lot of times, like I was saying, we get the game lands and it's like these upper pictures. They're very shrubby, and either they're have an extensive mid-story with shrubs and saplings, or like the one picture that has an upland that has no herbaceous layer at all underneath a closed canopy system. The bottom three pictures are pictures of some management that we've done on our game lands, and when you look at the numbers, we have around 2 million acres of game lands in the state. Of that, around 500,000 acres are owned by the Wildlife Commission. And when you look at the number of field crew, we have around 106 field crew members, and that includes the ecoregion supervisors, the foresters, the biologists, tech supervisors, and the technicians. When you break that out, if you go off to 2 million acres per person, that's around 19,811 acres for each individual to manage, if you're including the lands that we don't own as an agency. If you just want to look at the acres that the agency owns, and that's our main management, then it comes down to around 5,000 acres per person to manage. That's quite a bit, but thankfully we have a good crew, a lot of hardworking people that are able to get out there and really maximize our management. So what we look at a lot of time is ecological restoration. We're dealing with lands that have been degraded, damaged, or destroyed. And that has been the three main prime things that you can see with these three different definitions as time goes on, is that with ecological restoration, we're usually dealing in systems that have been degraded, damaged, or destroyed. I do like the last one. Our restoration reflects values regarded as inherent in the ecosystem. We do value the herbaceous understory, and that is a lot of time a goal. Many of the animals we manage for are for that, but also, like, for instance, the RCW, the red-cockaded woodpecker, it's really, it likes the structure of the herbaceous understory, but the longleaf pine or also pond pine and loblolly it will use, but it prefers the longleaf pine, is important to it. So we need to get those trees back on the landscape to a size that they can use. So we have to think about all of these things when we're doing this type of management. So why should we do it? I think our mission to conserve North Carolina's wildlife resources and their habitats and provide programs opportunities that allow hunters, anglers, boaters, and other outdoor enthusiasts to enjoy wildlife associated recreation. I think ecological restoration goes perfectly with our mission as an agency. First, ecological restoration does focus on a lot on biodiversity conservation. We're starting to see a lot of papers come out that for burning and different things that we do that does maximize the ecosystem services such as cleaner water, um, being able to do prescribed burns have actually shown to produce less hazardous smoke conditions than wildfires. Um, a lot of times we're very economical about the management that we do. And actually, with our forestry activities, we can generate some funds to help do other projects and help fund other things within the agency. So this ecological restoration is very important. It helps us to forward the progress of all of it. So how do we do it? Well, there's really four main ways. This is what I broke it down to. Forestry or silviculture practices. We do plantings, and water control is another one that a lot of people don't think about, but it is one that we're more heavily getting into. And we've been doing it for a while, but now we have some really big projects that are really focusing on the hydrology of the ecosystem. And then fire. Fire is a really big component of what we do. It's gets our biggest bang for our buck, and it's a natural process. So anytime you can use a natural process to restore the ecosystem, it's usually preferred. So our forestry. Um, Usually the first thing we're going to do, as you can see in these pictures, the upper pictures right here, there's very little herbaceous understory. There's a very prevalent mid-story with saplings and shrubs. And this is habitat. Us just buying this land does provide habitat for some generalist species and some, uh, and very few specialist species. But as we go through and manage, we actually maximize because a lot of these generalist species can also use these two habitats below, but also then you'll get in more specialists. These are by opening up that canopy, it allows that herbaceous understory to develop and really provide food for the animals that can't eat from the upper canopy of the forest. And actually doing the timber thinnings and the clear cuts, you actually see a response in biodiversity from the vegetation, different vegetation types. We start seeing more grasses and more forbs following a timber thinning or a harvest, and it gets us on our way towards restoration. It's usually a really good step. I try to allow my timber work to drive where my prescribed burning is going to expand. And I did not come up with this idea. I'm very thankful for the people that came before me that came up with a lot of these ideas um, about going in there and thinning and then uh, applying fire. And so I really get the gravy work. I just get to do it in action. So usually after a thinning, by doing that thinning, we reduce all these fuels, these vertical fuels, and it makes it a lot safer and easier to go do the prescribed burning there. If we still have issues where uh, the shrubs aren't, they're being killed by the fire, but they're not being outcompeted by the herbaceous vegetation, then we can also go to a chemical treatment, because if you have shrubs 8 foot high or you have shrubs 2 foot high, you still have shrubs, and shrubs aren't necessarily all bad, but they are out competing the herbaceous layer. So sometimes in certain situations, if we've burned it 2 or 3 times and we're not seeing the response we want, or in situations where it's not necessarily a good place to burn. There's too much organic fuels. It's beside a house, or where the risk of applying fire there is too great. Then we can use chemical and mechanical treatment. Each one has its positives and negatives. Chemical treatment, you can't use it on young stands a lot of times. You have to wait till older. That's why you see us allow some of our timber to mature longer, because we can go ahead and get that understory beginning to develop and actually work on it better under um, mature trees than we can if we were just as soon as we get a property, go in there and clear cut and go ahead and clear cut and plant longleaf or whatever species we want. Younger trees are more susceptible to these other types of treatment. And so we can really work on that herbaceous understory. And, a deer, or a turkey, or a quail, for the most part, I would say, don't mind being underneath the loblolly, whether it's a loblolly or a longleaf, as long as that understory has the right structure and the right food, they're going to be there and they're going to be using it. Now, when you do get into species like RCWs will use the pond pine and the loblolly, but their cavities don't seem to last as long. So it does seem that they do prefer the longleaf. So in our area, that's usually what we're going for, is a longleaf ecosystem understory, and with uneven age stand above it. So that's kind of our overarching goal. But we also have to consider what the soils are like. It takes a lot of pre-planning and thinking. You have to look at the soils, because if the site is too productive, it can be really hard to establish longleaf there, because actually the young longleaf can get out competed by the herbaceous understory. So then you have trouble forming the overarching canopy of the longleaf. So there's a lot to consider. And I'm not saying if the site is too productive, you can't establish longleaf. We have some game lands that are at very high site productivity. They're around 90 to 100. When we were given those, one of the stipulations was to convert it to longleaf, and it's doing well. It's on the White Oak River game land, and we have established over 400 acres of longleaf there, and they're about the majority of them are about 4 years old. We do have some that are nearing 18 years old. But our understanding of what it's going to look like and our goals have to change a little bit. We may go from wanting it to be the dominant species to a co-dominant canopy tree, because there are so many, that soil grows other vegetation and the longleaf so well that it really doesn't allow the longleaf to outcompete even in the where we're applying fire. I'm typically trying to burn that 2 years, and even still, we have to use some of these other treatments. We still use chemical on that site. Still using mechanical treatments. A lot of TSI work there, where we actually have crews come in and cut with brush cutters the shrubby and sapling species, just to allow those longleaf to get up an edge to where they can at least become the co-dominant. But the exciting thing about that is we are already starting to see in some of the older stands that with this productive soil, we get a wider range of understory species once it gets established, once those trees get up enough to shade out some of the other species, some of the other saplings. We actually see a better, more diverse understory, and that White Oak's a really interesting site. It has a lot of lime outcropping. So anyways, and then a final harvest. So once the trees become mature, like I was saying earlier, what we're going to want to do is go in and we can either decide to do a clear cut all at once, or do group cuttings. If there's some residual longleaf on there, then we can mark them to be protected and leave them. But most of the time, with the acreages we're dealing with, to be efficient and to be able to try to manage as many acres that we own as possible, we're doing a clear cut, and then we're doing a chemical site prep and following up with burning to prepare the site so that the young longleaf that we're establishing has a chance. And then we go straight into planting. Now, you know, most of the planting that I do is tree species, but along with those tree species, we're also establishing warm season grasses. There's most of our longleaf now is being planted with wiregrass or the savanna mix, which is wiregrass, blue stem, and Indian plume grass, I believe it is, from the state nursery. And the grass is really important in a lot of sites because it gives us the fuel to go back and be able to burn within 2 to 3 years following planting. And plus, it was part of the natural component. Also, on some other sites, I know, like at the sandbanks up in the northern coast, they have done some herbaceous planting of forbs on some sites that they were just having a lot of trouble for things coming in, and it seemed to work really good, and it helped get it to a better place quicker. So sometimes that is an option. Um, Also, I'd like to highlight that as a group, we're starting to do more on our game lands with these bottom pictures. So this picture is actually a field in on a track that we've had about 5 years, and it was a field. We've burned it a couple times to see what would happen, see if we could stimulate some good regrowth from the natural seed bank. And all we got were Sesbania, rattlebox, which is non-native, and a lot of saplings and a lot of regeneration from the surrounding loblolly pines. So what we decided was that it would be wise for us to spray it and disc it and get some local seed source and plant it in forbs. It's got about 35% mix of grass, native warm season grasses in with it. And as you can see in this picture, it came up really well. This is the first year following planting. And this is a closer picture of it. And it's doing great. I think we're about 2 years in, and everything is from head high to chest high out there. And it is out competing all the other hard wood stems that would want to come up, and any regeneration from the pine. Also, our idea behind this was native seed can be hard to attain and very expensive. So we do, as an agency, have a seed collector. I believe it's at Suggs right now, and I think Benji uses it a lot. And this would give us a seed source that, if we didn't have other options, we would be able to collect from and actually do some understory restoration on some sites that may need it if we're not seeing the response from the forbs community that we wanted to. Also, this one over here, we were having erosion issues on this road, and it's not a heavily used road. It's more for our use as maintenance and as a fire line. So what we decided to do was go to the same seed source as over here and get a mix that could help with the erosion and also provide some food source. And hopefully, and what we have been seeing is, as we plant these road shoulders and we plant these areas, after we go in and burn, these seeds do make it out into the stand. By putting this seed source on the landscape, we do see that it's starting to move and actually help the end stand of herbaceous cover with diversity. And actually, sometimes we can get a little too heavy on grasses following burning. So having those forb seeds there and moving into the stand does seem to help a lot. With a project we're talking about a little later in the talk, we've also used this same seed source, almost the same mix, for planting our road shoulders at Angola. And it really came up. It was really nice. The quail right now are all in it, and turkeys also. So the next way that we can manage is water control. And all of these pictures are from the Angola Bay Hydrology Project that I'll talk a little more later. But we have been doing this on game lands for quite a while, not just in our impoundments. I know Holly Shelter has some water control structures that we adjust in the summertime when we start getting in drought conditions. Before we get there, we're putting boards in these water control structures to try to reduce wildfire risk and also reduce ground fire risk. And so we've been doing it for a while now. We're really starting to expand on it, especially partnering with TNC. And restoring the hydrology can be very important. It can add diversity because water is a disturbance factor also. A lot of times people don't see it that way, but it does create disturbance. It may not do it as fast as fire, but when you change the hydrology, you are going to change the vegetation type. You're actually probably going to see some more edge effects where that water goes up to, and where it when it floods out in high water areas, it is going to change that plant community and add variation along the landscape. And just wanted to point out, these are flashboard risers, what water control structures, and these are flashboard risers, and this is what we call a weir. Um, and these have a little more control um, of the water level, because they allow you to drain it all the way out. The weirs do not allow you to drain it all the way out, but what they do allow is for us to make a wall here along the ditch, and give us extra control points, because we couldn't just put a flashboard riser here, and it be as effective. So this weir is actually appropriate, going in the ditch, instead of at an intersection like here. So it's going to give us better control over the long run. And fire. Fire's my favorite. I'm really thankful I get paid to set things on fire. Um, but really, what I enjoy the most is coming back following the fire, seeing the response of the understory, seeing how the herbaceous layer is moving into the ecotone, and out competing the shrub layer a lot of times. That's usually where I see a lot of rare plants. And there's a lot of different things that we use fire for, like establishing longleaf. If you cannot burn there, it is next to impossible to establish longleaf unless you're going to spend a lot of time and a lot of money. So some stands, even if longleaf naturally would have occurred there, but there's too many houses, there's nowhere we can put our smoke, then it's not feasible for us to do that, because it will be fighting a losing battle. But thankfully, on a lot of our game lands, we do have enough buffer that we're able to put our smoke somewhere, or have good holding lines where we don't have to worry about burning onto somebody else's property. Also, like right here, this is a marsh. As you can see, it goes up into a pined upland. So at Goose Creek and in the Central Coast, it's a little different than a lot of other places. We have longleaf pine that goes directly into the marsh. And that makes it interesting. It also makes it fun. But also with burning the marsh, I'm seeing, especially since these are brackish marshes and not as saline, as the ones closer to the coast, you actually see diversity begin to happen, as you start treating it with fire. You actually see flowering plants starting to come into it, and it's not all black needle rush. This is a burn that, following a thinning, and hoping that it will actually open up this seed bed so that the longleaf that are left can regenerate, and we can start growing the next series of longleaf forest, because these trees are about 100 years old, and longleaf can live to be 300 to 500 years old. But at some point, you guys start regenerating those forests. So that uneven age stand is really what we're going for. And this is later in the year. I think this is around the 1st of August, and it actually, hopefully will open up, leave that ground open enough that the longleaf seeds can actually make good contact and regenerate. This is more of a flatwood, so regeneration is a little harder because the site does grow so much vegetation that a lot of times the seed can't make soil contact and actually establish a sapling. So that's kind of the thought process behind that. And This is another picture. You can see we're using boats to light the marsh, and this is the pine upland. Both of these, the pine upland and the marsh, definitely benefit from fire, and we do see biodiversity in both because of our application of fire. A lot of times, these marshes that haven't been burned, as you saw in my first slide, we'll go back to it right quick. One second. So, as you see up here, this is Salters Creek when we first got it. We had a big storm overwash. You see the rack line is all the way to the creek. There's just thousands of acres of marsh there that was completely, all the marsh grass was laid down because of this storm and this rack line that was washed up on it. Actually, right here, the creek is completely covered. We couldn't get the boat any further. But now uh, there's a lot of diversity in these marshes because they've been burned at least once. This rack line's gone. We didn't see for 2 years, we didn't see this recovering from this either. Following the burn, it greened right back up, and now we have waist high to chest high wetland grass species out there. A lot of cut grass came back right here. So that's just one example of how marsh does benefit from fire. Also, there's some research coming out. There's a couple that I've read about a year ago showing that burning marsh actually can cause accretion or cause the marsh to raise in elevation. What happens is the roots actually get stimulated to grow, and as they grow up into the duff layer that's there, and then as they grow up and get it a little higher up, the water, as water floods over it, those roots catch the soil or sediment that's in the water, and then it settles out there and actually can cause the whole marsh to elevate some. Now, is it going to be greater than sea level rise? We'll have to see, but it is something that does help. Uh, Reintroductory of fire, that can be dangerous. This is one of the first burns at Salter Creek. You can see it's very intense. Those are about 40-foot flames right there. We were finishing that burn up. We had a lot of black on the other side, and it really helped. Probably one of the problems that we were seeing this was we're not able to do timber harvest there. So without doing that first timber harvest, we really don't get a fuels treatment. So we are having to go in and burn everything that's with this case that's built up since 1985. 1985 was about the last time that that land had burned in a wildfire. So without that pre-treatment of that timber harvest and being able to knock down some of that vertical fuel, it can really get impressive and hairy. But thankfully at Salters Creek, it's out away from any houses. It's on a peninsula where we can contain it on the peninsula. So that is why we're able to reintroduce fire there. There are some situations where it's just not feasible, unfortunately. But if we can get in there and do some thinning or some mastication with our for fuel treatment, then it makes it a lot easier and a lot safer for us to do. Also, one other thing is this picture right here. This was done at the end of April. Some of y'all might have saw it in the Inside Wildlife email. This was a burn that we did jointly with Croatan at the end of April. And right here, you might notice that there's probably around 200 houses right here. Um, and as everybody I'm sure knows, and this has been a problem even back, I first found out about it when I was at NC State back in 2009 or 2008. Um, but we are the leader in wildland urban interface, and that is where the wildland meets up with houses. And we're the leader in the US. And this is starting to become a big problem as we see urban sprawl. Some people call it urban sprawl. When you're talking about fire, usually we refer to as wildland urban interface. Um, it really makes it difficult. We have to have a south wind, and a good south wind so that there's no change in direction to be able to burn this. And luckily, we've been burning this since we got the property in 2004, and we're able to work with other partners to really help us. This is what the property looks like. On the ground at Pettiford Creek. And so we've got the fuel levels really managed well there, and we're able to continue to apply fire even in these situations where it seems like it uh, may not be possible to. But with the partnerships and the continued um, management, as long as we keep those fuel levels down, we'll be able to continue doing things like that. But as urban sprawl continues to occur, these situations, because putting smoke, not only the fire itself, but where you put your smoke, is very big deal. And as these houses move out into our wilderness areas or our forested areas, it makes it really tough. At Rocky Run, we just did a clear cut, and we're getting ready to reestablish longleaf. And right across the boundary was nice stand of loblolly. Well, and about a mile up the road, we had some other. There were um, some houses, housing developments. Well, about 2 months after we had ours clear cut, the 100 acres behind Rocky Run was clear cut to expand those housing developments right behind our game land. And it's going to make it difficult to do the maintenance burns on those longleaf. It wasn't what we planned, and really had no idea what was going to happen. So we have to be very thoughtful when we're making these decisions. So I came up with this one because, like I've been talking about, we as managers have to balance the risk and reward for the resource, not just for personal property and personnel. But the way I came up with this is talking to different biologists within our agency, outside our agency, um, within and reading literature. And basically, over time, this is kind of where this came from. So these are times that it's suggested, like for wild turkey. A lot of people don't want us to be burning while wild turkeys are nesting, even though some recent research has shown that that most of the turkey nests aren't going to be hurt by fire. They established them in wetter areas that usually do not affect their nests, but also we're only burning a small percentage of that. And then you go into bobwhite nesting, American duck or American black duck nesting. Then you have the eclipse plumage for them. Then you have like the black rail. The black rail is at a state right now where um, any take of that could be adverse for it. So if we're doing some of these burns in the marsh, where these black rails are, we have to be careful, because if we burn a nest up, that lessens their productivity, or they also have an eclipse plumage and they possibly couldn't get away from the fire. But as you see, the overall thing is, I feel like everybody on this call would say that prescribed fire is good for wildlife. I think that's one thing we can all agree on. Getting fire on the landscape, as much as possible, is good. But so in all these situations, we have to look at what's there on the property, but also if we followed this and assumed that these were on our properties, then we'd have a couple weeks in December that we could burn, and that's definitely not the best time for burning. Sometimes we do have to burn. We prefer to burn in December and January and February, and that's usually because we get a new property and we're trying to reduce those fuel loads. It does have some effect on the understory, but just wanted to point that out, put it into a picture that, getting fire on the landscape is important. And actually, return interval, how many years since burn, has been shown to be more important than time of year for the vegetation type response. So now that we've talked about restoration on our game lands, we'll go into 2 examples. So these, thankfully, Casey allowed me to borrow his slide. He's been the main one working on the forestry part of RASP, and he allowed me to borrow these slides. And as of right now, as you can see, 80% of the timber harvest have been done and this is at Bear Gardens. And our next slide is 100% of the timber harvest at Stones Creek have been done. This is about 15,000 acres that's in the RASP program, and basically that's recovering land for RCWs. And as you can see, there's been 12 timber sales. This $4.5 million, that's big because that has enabled us to buy the longleaf, to buy the seed, to restore the understory, to pay for other things, for like the infrastructure, to allow us to have good roads to access, good fire lines. And as you can see, Casey and his coworkers down there have established 2,100 acres at 2,100 acres at Bear Garden and 1,100 acres of longleaf and native warm season grasses at these sites. The burning, it's really increased the burning at Holly Shelter. There was already a large, heavy load of burning at Holly Shelter, but with these recent timber sales and establishment, there's a lot of maintenance that has to go on following the planting of the longleaf. So we got to get in there and burn 2 to 3 years after they've been planted. So it's really enabled us to expand the burning there. And also, I'd like to point out that through a lot of this, it's branched off. We have a grant where we've, with Onslow Bite, that has enabled us to have burn crews, have aerial ignition for burning, fuel reduction projects. Also, Quail Forever and Wild Turkey Federation have really assisted in funding some of these things that we need: more equipment and establishing better fire breaks and fuel treatments in these areas. So this is what you get after you do some management. This is, most of these pictures came at the end of May. Just about an hour riding around Bear Garden. Got 2 species of milkweed, a lot of different native flowers, and even the killdeer are like in our rock roads. And this is our Venus flytrap. There's just thousands of them out there that have responded to the burning and the clear cuts. So now this one is kind of some new territory for us. As an agency, we are doing hydrology projects, or a hydrology project at Angola, also considering a hydrology project at Holly Shelter right now. And this is basically restoring the hydrology of this Pocosin. And basically what we're going to do, we have a water control structure here, and then another one here and here. So those are going to be the 4 points. But what's going to allow us to do is hold the water table to within about 2 foot or a foot of the surface out here. And there are going to be parts along the road, along these points where it exits out, that are going to be underwater. I think it's around 3%. And that's definitely going to change some of this vegetation type. As you can see here, here. You'll be able to see it in the next slide a little better. Those were actually stands of loblolly plantation. So prior to holding the water back, we went in and clear cut, and part of the grant was to do some planting. And this was a great opportunity for us to be able to, in these areas like this, we're going to plant cypress. We tried to find pond cypress, but there's not a good 100% seed source, so it's going to be a mix of pond and bald cypress. But on the northern part over here off the map, we have some rookeries of egrets, wood storks. So maybe in 100, 200 years, some of these spots that we have cypress can eventually become rookeries for those species. This right here is Atlantic white cedar. Where Atlantic white cedar is only 1% of the whole. It's only left on 1% of its native range, historical range, and there were some back in 1903 was when the timber inventory was done that we were actually able to read. There were some on the periphery of Angola Bay, Pocosin, and felt it was a good time to be able to get this back on the landscape here. And we're going to try and do it a little different than what's been done in the past. A lot of people go for 8x8 spacing. When they plant Atlantic white cedar, you get the best survival that way, I believe is what they feel. But we have seen where we can plant at a more spread out rate. Hoffman Forest has done this, and actually it allows for some understory to come in underneath it. So we're going to plant it at part of it at 15 by 12. And then these group spacings are something that we're going to try, and hopefully we can get some research in the future. And sorry about that. And basically we're going to plant each little dot out here 8x8 spacing, but then we're going to have these sections in between each group to be able to have Pocosin or herbaceous underneath. So that's what we're looking for there, and still have good habitat for things to use other than just something that doesn't have any understory underneath it, which is what we've seen with Atlantic white cedar plantings in the past. And this last slide, these last two slides are kind of some pictures that I've taken across our different game lands. This one is of the plants, the flowering species. These are all taken from my phone while I'm in the field. So please forgive the photography, but this is just a little taste of what, we have on our game lands across the state, especially in the coast. Most of these are in the coast. All of these are in the coastal plains. And then these are some of the fauna that I've encountered across our game lands. And I'm Jeff Hall. I'm glad to be able to have these, but the mammals are a little harder to get to stand still than the herps to take a picture. Um, so that's why it's a little more heavy on the herps. And by the way, this right here is a timber rattlesnake eating an eastern gray squirrel. So with that, if there's any questions.
It is. Awesome job, Travis. Thank you, sir. For our listeners, if you have any questions, please go ahead and drop those in the chat, and I can read those off and Travis can address them. I think we've got one from Sarah Schweitzer. So Travis, she asked, is grazing beneficially reducing herbaceous plant layer and shrub saplings if grazing by goats, or farming providing food plot benefits? So essentially, do we have any examples of leases used to manage any of our game lands?
No, I think probably the closest thing we had to that was we had some beekeepers that would lease sites on our game lands. And we're actually trying to get out of that. So as far as goats or any grazing animals, no. Typically, we have enough deer or natural grazing on our game lands. We're trying to maximize the native species on these areas, especially as urban sprawl continues to advance.
Yeah, and then on the farming lease side of the question, I guess we do have a couple farm leases that have wildlife benefits, some on impoundments and some that are more Duffields.
Yes, yeah, we do have some leases on especially impoundments. Um, and I really didn't highlight any of that because I didn't feel that was really in our restoration process.
Yeah. And then Chris Baranski asked, what is the blue flower in the top left of the flower collage slide towards the end?
Yeah, it's a type of gentian. Um, I can't remember specifically off the top of my head, but it's a type of gentian.
And Chris Cray is asking if management options are limited by dedication language through Natural Heritage Program or other types of deed restrictions.
Um, like I was saying, it can be, because really, if it's primary dedication, it really limits what we can go in there and do. Basically, what we can do is put a fire line in or around it and try to establish fire. Um, there is a process to work with Natural Heritage, and they have been helpful and have worked well with us in the past, where if we can show that by doing a mechanical treatment or a timber harvest that it would actually improve, then we can get a grant for one-time access to do those treatments. And we have done that. Uh, but for the most part, it, it I don't know. It can be difficult, but we have enough to focus on our other areas that are buffer or non-primary, that we're still able to get a lot of management done.
Yeah, and just you may have hit this, Travis, but when we apply for land and water fund grants to purchase land these days, we were able to include our request to reserve rights, and a lot of those reserve rights are management of early successional habitat, creation of open areas for habitat management or for habitat species benefit. So we're able to include quite a few reserve rights to allow for more management. Have a question from Sarah Schweitzer. Do all game lands have management plans completed for them, and how often are the management plans updated?
I think most of our game lands have completed management plans. I couldn't say for all across the state. And I believe they're supposed to be updated 10 or 15 years.
I think that's correct.
And the management biologists work with those a little more, and they were on our websites, the ones that have been completed. They were on our website.
Yeah, and Sarah, I know a lot of the first management plans that were created, they're up for renewal at this point, and I know some of our biologists are working through making any updates to new acquisitions that were added to those game lands and any different management prescriptions that we're planning to implement. So I think some of those are going through that renewal process currently. We have a question from TR Russ. Does the division or different regions have exotic plant or species removal plans? For examples, kudzu, privet, or tree of heaven?
So we don't necessarily have a plan. As it pops up, we definitely deal with it. I was working with a crew 2 weeks ago. We were spraying wisteria. It actually had taken down about 3 acres of 80-foot tall pines on some of our game land, and it was really bad. So when I had it sprayed last year with actual skitter, and this year we went back and spot sprayed, and that is actually part of our plan. Or I know it's part of my plan, is addressing as these invasives pop up. Privet really stops our burning. I don't have any with kudzu or really tree of heaven. I have more mimosa, privet, and wisteria, and there are usually, unfortunately, the best treatment for all of those is chemical, because we can actually get them off the landscape before more seed gets out there and go ahead and take care of it. And we are just going to have to spot spray continually with those.
And we've got one final question. I think we're getting close to our 12 o'clock cutoff. Kendrick Weeks is asking he said, I noticed that you use historical occurrence forest ecosystem type as a restoration target. Are there any instances where this is not the ideal target? And do you have an example?
Historical occurrence type as a restoration target. We're doing our best with historical occurrences, trying to take snapshots from Lawson and Bartram and these other really older naturalists that wrote books, and then using some of our predecessors' map layers where they mapped out the soils to put the different vegetation types where they should be on the landscape. And sometimes it can be difficult. Those layers aren't 100% accurate. And like I said, it can be difficult to put longleaf on higher site productivities, or where higher site productivity is. And that's not always ideal. But I think once we get them established, it's going to be amazing. It's a lot of work up front, but once it's established, I do think that having that codominant longleaf will be very helpful. I hope I answered your question. That was a bit, I'm not sure I truly understood the question.
Thank you, Travis. And if anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out to Travis after we get off here. I'm sure he'd be happy to talk with you and address those questions. Thank you, everybody, for coming. A recording will be made available on our YouTube channel, and an email will be sent out when this recorded presentation is ready to be viewed. And please join us next month when Aaron Bunch from Clemson University will be joining us to present on fish passage evaluation on the Cape Fear River. And I believe that will be on August 13th. Thanks, everybody. And thank you again, Travis. Great job.
Thank you for the opportunity.